global citizenship. Just to keep in mind these three words as we go forward. So keep your critical thinking hat on, be reflective, and ask the panelists a lot of engaging and interesting questions that will help us to look at global dilemmas, look at ethical dilemmas as we go forward. This event is organized by, along with Bridge 47, Mission 4.7, Ban Ki-moon Foundation, and the Center for Sustainable Development. So really a group of organizations that are focusing on thinking beyond just green jobs, focusing on education for sustainable development and global citizenship education. As we go forward, just going through our Zoom etiquettes, we will be recording this session. A lot of our audience are not able to join today because HLPF, High Level Political Forum, is going on, but they are really interested in listening about and hearing about these the conversations that we do today. So if you're uncomfortable, please keep your video off, and I would also urge to keep our microphone or mics off so that we can hear clearly. And we can have our recordings also, visible and audible going forward. So with that, I just want to open up the session with our Executive Director, the Executive Director for the Center for Sustainable Development, Dr. Yanis Benamor. We are happy that you are here today. Maybe a welcoming remark from you before we kickstart the event.
Thank you so much, Radhika. Thank you so much, everyone. My name is Yanis Benamor. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Sustainable Development here at Columbia University. So just a few words about the Center for Sustainable Development. So we were started actually in 2016 to host our boss, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, as he was transitioning from the directorship of the Earth Institute. And really the goal of the Center for Sustainable Development is to develop innovative solutions to try to reach the SDGs by 2030. So we have three main areas of expertise: SDG 3, health; SDG 4, education, which is bringing us together today; and I would say also probably SDG 5, gender. So a lot of the work that we're doing is basically based on having digital solutions. So for example, in the field of health, which I represent, we have created a lot of digital tools to help, for example, during the Ebola crisis, to equip community health workers to track Ebola cases. For HIV, for example, we have digital tools to help HIV positive patients to keep adhering to their treatments. And more recently in Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, we started a program using digital tools to provide literacy and also healthcare access to refugee populations. So really, this idea of innovation and digital is at the heart of a lot of the solutions that we do. I should say that we used to be part of the Earth Institute. We have now been, the name has been changed to the Climate School. And I think this is really important because we are one of over 30 centers that are part of the Climate School. And I would say this is probably one of few institutes or center of excellence in the world that is really focusing on climate change. So both how climate change is impacting mankind, but also how we as researchers can try to come up with solutions, maybe to try to reverse the negative impact of climate change. So at CSD, there is another initiative that is working on global citizenship education that I wanted to mention. So Columbia University has 11 centers called the Columbia Global Centers, and I actually have them here in order to make sure that I don't forget any of them. So they are based in Amman, Jordan; Athens, Greece; Beijing, China; Istanbul, Turkey; Mumbai, India; Nairobi, Kenya; Paris, France; Rio de Janeiro, Brazil; Santiago, Chile; Tel Aviv, Israel; and Tunis, Tunisia, where I am from. So there is a funding mechanism called President Global Innovation Fund, PGIF, which is available only to Columbia faculty, which requires you to work with the Columbia Global Centers, at least one of them, and propose innovative ideas that maybe would not immediately find funding mechanisms outside in the more traditional sense. And so it's seed funding. And last year, we proposed with Columbia Global Center Tunis and Columbia Global Center Istanbul a project on global citizenship education. And the idea behind it was as follows. There are issues in the world. Obviously, this group today is probably more convinced than many other groups. There are issues in the world that affect all of us equally, whether it's climate change, gender equality or inequality, pandemics. Wouldn't it be wonderful if, regardless of the track that you're in, regardless of the studies that you're focusing on, you would at least once in your lifetime be exposed to those issues and learn about them? So this was the idea of this PGIF. So we're working with a network of universities in Tunisia and in Turkey to do multiple things. Number one, work with students to come up with these concepts of global citizenship. What does that mean to you as a student from that country? What is it that you would want to learn? Number two, let's work with these universities to change the curricula, to change the syllabi. So we are at that step now where we have identified these key concepts, and we're now working with these networks of universities to try to upgrade, let's just say, the curricula in 2024. So final word before I hand it over back to you. You were talking about 3 words, 3 concepts. Allow me to add a 4th one, equity. So it is going to be very clear that people in the global north, if I can call it that, will have access to these skills. They'll be able to find them. They'll be able to be trained on them. And you are going to see this gap become wider again. Can we make sure that everyone in low and middle income countries who wants to have access to these skills for the transition, for greener jobs, also has access to those? I think this is a formidable challenge, and I am very, very proud that CSD is part of this initiative today to try to find solutions to make sure that really everyone has access to those. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yanis. I think you bring in very different aspects to our discussion today. I'm so glad that you are here contributing to the discussion. I want to also hand it over to Kate Langdon from the Ban Ki-moon Foundation, who has been spearheading a lot on global citizenship education, much more with a multicultural, multi-sectoral perspective. So, Kate, over to you to just explain some of the vision of the Ban Ki-moon Foundation and how is it helping global citizenship education dialogue.
Thank you, Radhika. So we are indeed very happy to be here co-hosting this event. I'd love to share just a few words about the Ban Ki-moon Foundation and why this conversation is indeed so important to us. So the foundation was created by former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon as one of 3 offices internationally with the goal of mobilizing leaders of all backgrounds toward the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. We are based here in New York City, and we do have sister offices in Vienna and Korea. Some of my colleagues are joining us today online. In particular, our colleagues in Vienna from the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens send their regrets that they were not able to attend in person. But I wanted to acknowledge also their leadership, including the leadership of the CEO there, Monica Freuler, as part of the Mission 4.7 initiative that Radhika mentioned, along with UNESCO, the Center for Sustainable Development, and others, which I know will be discussed today. At the Ban Ki-moon Foundation here in New York, our work focuses on the US, Latin America, and Caribbean through 3 strategies. The first is advocacy to increase financial commitments for the SDGs. The second is leadership development for women and youth as emerging leaders for the 2030 Agenda. And the third is investment in catalytic solutions that advance the SDGs locally. We know that 2023 is a crucial year to reflect on the successes and challenges at the halfway point for the 2030 Agenda. On many issues related to climate, gender equity, as was mentioned, food insecurity, et cetera, we know we still have a long way to go. Here in the US, for example, despite our many resources, we rank just 39th in the world currently. So building upon that theme of equity, I would also highlight that as an issue for us to focus on in the US, I think as that ranking highlights. To help correct this within the Foundation's advocacy efforts, we are working to mobilize private philanthropy to incorporate just transition frameworks towards regenerative economies that do have a strong gender and racial equity lens, and ensure that those who have been most marginalized historically are centered in policy decisions moving forward. And we are launching fellowships and networks that promote the leadership of communities such as women, survivors of gender-based violence, Indigenous communities, and LGBTQI+ communities to bring their expertise in greater numbers and with greater influence on the world stage. And we believe that none of this can be done without boldly addressing how all of us in society, as has been mentioned, including youth, are going to be equipped with the knowledge and skills needed to fully participate, build, and lead new ways of being in harmony with people and planet. So we are not meant to have any favorite SDGs. But I have to highlight in this context of this discussion that for the SDG 4 and its focus on education is extremely important in that it undergirds all of the other SDGs. And I'm glad that we will be hearing more about best practices in global citizenship, education, and education for sustainable development today. Last, we do strongly believe in the power of cross-sector dialogue and partnership, and where it makes sense, coalition building. So we hope that we walk away from today with some inspiration, building upon the successes of Mission 4.7 and other efforts, and ideas for possible further collaboration, as Radhika has mentioned. And we do encourage you to stay in touch with us and with the other panelists featured as we plan for further engagements, particularly in September with UNGA Climate Week and other larger conversations around progress towards the SDGs. So thank you, Radhika, for your hospitality, and to the Center for Sustainable Development for hosting us in person today on this hot day in New York City. I turn the floor back to you, Radhika.
Thank you so much, Kate. Really, I think this is what we need to be doing. Kate mentioned collaborate, work together. This is our only hope. So let's be in touch. This is not a one-off event. Sorry, getting distracted with a lot of my friends joining, which is fantastic. But please keep joining and keep engaging as we go forward. Finally, to introduce the panelists here, we'll send a link on our chat very soon to fully introduce the panelists. But here are our panelists who kindly given us some time during this HLPF High Level Political Forum busy week. We have Rajiv joining from London. We have Lily Gray joining from UNESCO New York. We have Lily joining from Bridge 47, who's here with us, and Hannah joining from UNICEF. Tim is here at Columbia University, and Wendy joining from Rutgers. Really grateful that you all are here with us today. Please allow me to let you know that if you can, each question, there'll be 2 rounds. The first round will be 1 question each. If you can stick to 3 minutes. We also have 69 people who've joined, so we'll give them the floor to ask questions after round 1. So I'll just quickly head over to our questions because that's the most important part of our discussion today. First question is for Wendy. Wendy, you are at Rutgers University and you work on courses. There are students coming to you. So wanted to ask you what is the role of higher education in green skilling for jobs, and what do you think universities should be playing? What role do you think universities should be playing or are playing, and what are some of the gaps?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Radhika, and thank you to everyone on the panel. I'm looking forward to our discussion. So yes, to kick us off, really, I think when we're talking about the role of higher education, we're really talking about transforming lives through the education and the research that we do. I mean, we clearly serve a number of different stakeholders, across our teaching and learning, our research innovation, and of course, our kind of civic and community work. And many institutions are civic institutions, they're anchor institutions, they're placemakers, they support the health ecosystem, they support science parks, innovation centers, and they're core often to the kind of local, regional economy. And I think one of the things that's critical here is the kind of convening power of higher education. We are very much engines of change, social architects, able to drive the equity, and we've got to do more work there, but we're also part of that economic prosperity. I don't want to choose an SDG either, but clearly SDG 4 is one that, as Kate said, uplifts others. So when we're talking about quality education, we're seeing, benefits, co-benefits in health and well-being, around decent work and economic growth, and of course, partnerships for the goals. But I think the focus for us here is about going beyond that sense of job training for the workplace. We're talking here about the kind of holistic life skills that build sustainable communities and that make that just transition, bridging from here to there. And I think that's inherent in Target 4.7. It talks, yes, about the knowledge and skills, of course it does, but actually it has an outcome measure which is about how we make that broader contribution to sustainable development. So we're talking, as this session is, beyond workforce development. We're talking about life skills, focusing on, you know, prosperity, inclusive prosperity, peace, working in harmony, as you said, with the sense of our planet. So yes, we need the kind of technical competencies to kind of focus in on the solutions, but we also need to be thinking about the emotional resilience, the sense of compassion and humility that drive learning and drive that sense of engagement. So this beyond green jobs, this focus, as you said, Radhika, on a just transition and this sense of global citizenship, we're not talking about a marginal suite of jobs. We're talking about all jobs. We're talking about greening, you know, the entire economy when we look at this just transition. And I wanted to call out here the work that we do with respect to leadership. And so we talk about our students being leaders now and leaders of tomorrow. And so I think there's something about how can we ensure that leaders build that global mindset, that sense of purpose? How can they build trust? How can they cultivate optimism, you know, in the face of the kind of VUCA conditions of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity? I mean, at this midpoint in the SDGs, we're looking very much, I think, at our role as an enabler, as an accelerator. And so I think moving from yes, our technical and a skills focus, but that really just picks up part of our role and it focuses on human doing. And I think we need to move the dial into recognizing kind of human being, you know, so that education for resilience, that education for setting people up to have the empathy and the caring that drives the practical action. I think, frankly, we're underserving many of our students right now. I think we're not crediting their work on sustainable development. We often still situate it in the informal curriculum. And I think we have a social responsibility to kind of drive the literacy and that sense of employability and citizenship. I think it is our business. And I just finish really by focusing on how we can take the role of higher education and this skilling around green jobs and this just transition that you talked about, and really focus our global education and around citizenship, focus it on flourishing, on human flourishing, you know, going beyond this sense of simply being happy, but focusing on how can we enable everyone, leaving no one behind, to live a good life. And so part of this education space is around how do we create meaning? How do we hold self-esteem? How do we respect the dignity of everyone so that, you know, anyone can flourish? But I think, you know, the challenge for us now is how do we make sure that everyone has the opportunity to do that and create that world that leaves no one behind. There are some startling statistics around the lack of equity that we can maybe touch on. But there also are some new ways of thinking about this space, and I'll come to that a little bit later on in our session perhaps. But we did some of this thinking at the SDSN USA Transformative Education Summit. And what bubbled up there and is in our new paper that should be out shortly are a range of new ways of thinking about the kind of skills suite. And as I say, that sort of sense of transitioning from focusing simply on doing to this sense of embracing human being, that broader construct. So, you know, some thoughts to kick us off.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I think you've given us some ambition with higher education. I also now want to get a release take from Bridge 47 in terms of higher education is one focus, but there's obviously so many other focuses in green skills. More, you know, I wanted to ask you, what is more to you? What is beyond green jobs? When we say that, what does that beyond mean for you?
Thank you, Radhika, and really happy to be here and excellent start, or not to start exactly, it's one stop on the path, what we have really went through quite a long time and still need to cooperate and moving on that. What the more means to me is that every one of us, we are having 24 hours per day, and I think that it really depends how we use that. So it's really coming back on the all kind of behaviors what we are having, whatever we do during the daytime or the nighttime as well. And sometimes we have to rest as well, which is one part of this keeping us really available and really making the good work what we want to do that. So my point really comes from that point of view that definitely the formal education is really important. That's really is the basis that how we have the skills, how to really be really the good people in the job lives. But it's not enough because we definitely behave outside of the work life as well and outside of the schools. And that's why I think that the combination of the formal, non-formal, and informal is the solution. So we need to definitely use all the aspects. And I think that all of us, we can remember as a part of our own life that when we hated the school time, that was awful. It was really horrible to be there. We were just dreaming to get out of the school and doing much more nicer things outside. And I think that's the beauty of the life as well, that you are motivated by doing different things. You can do that through the sports or whatever you want to learn the languages or you want to do whatever motivates you. And I think that really is the key on there, that if the people find his or her motivation, it's really effective to make a change. And I think that really is one of the things which I think that we definitely need to use and build on that. Because if the people are motivated, they feel that I'm useful, I can give something, be part of the communities, then I can really make the changes. And I think that really is so important in parallel with the skills in the jobs. We definitely want to be much more green ones, much more equal ones, and really making the good work on there. So I think that when we are talking about the skills, we need to really keep in mind about the values, because the values drive this world anyway. We have the bad values, but we unfortunately have quite a lot of examples at the moment on there, but how to really build the values so that we really take care of the human rights and really respecting every single people in this planet. It really depends on the attitudes, that what is our attitude vis-a-vis for the others in the world. So how I'm respecting you or am I hating you, that's really putting that black and white. I think that it really matters that what is your attitude vis-a-vis how you would like to contribute and live your life. It really matters. Definitely you need just different kind of skills, and it's not only technical skills, but you need to have the skills how to behave, how to really respect the nature, for example. So there's different kind of skills what you need. And indeed, you need to have the knowledge, because if you have the knowledge, you are much more capable. For example, reflect on the different kind of news which are coming everywhere all the time at the moment. So how you can really take that, is it as a fake news or is disinformation or whatever, are you capable to really react on that? You need to have the tools, you need to have the skills, you need to have the knowledge behind on there that you can really reflect this as well at what's coming out. So in that way, I think we in the Bridge 47, which is a global network promoting and advocating for the SCD 4.7, because we really believe that exactly if we don't really take that part seriously, we are not achieving any of the other goals, but nothing else in the world, because it's everything. We are living in the ecosystem where we are so much depending in each other as a human beings, but also about the nature where we are living. And that's why we need to really see that more from the holistic point of view, and really making this transformation, which I think we all have a lot of evidences at the moment that the business as usual doesn't function anymore. We need to find the solutions how we can really build something new, which is good for all, for the people and the planet at the same time. But none of us can't really do that alone. And that is the key point that what we're trying in the Bridge 47, to really bridges different educators, different individuals, different organizations globally, and joining the forces and trying to make the hopefully the positive change in the world. But I will stop here now and then happy to continue afterwards. Thank you very much.
the holistic perspective to get value-based education, communities involved in formal education. We just focus on formal education most of the time, and I think a big part of where we live in our communities, neighborhoods are not impacted by just focusing on formal education. So thanks for getting that important perspective in. I'll move over to Lily Gray from UNESCO. Lily, we know that UNESCO is really championing this greening of education partnership and doing a lot on bringing ESG to the forefront. I wanted to see if there are any updates on how this trajectory has been, what are the different types of partnerships that have been envisioned, and where is UNESCO in this movement so far?
Thank you, Radhika. Good morning. Very nice to see everybody around the table, colleagues, friends, distinguished guests and speakers. I'm happy to join you today, the discussion. And as the world is grappling very hard how to reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius path recommended by Paris Agreement, we continue seeing major natural disasters continue to surprise global community. Just last week, we absolutely had the hottest day on Earth in the last 100 years, and yet education systems globally have not been ready to engage and prepare the future of the world through relevant, quality, and inclusive learning processes. And let me cite here a few recent findings of UNESCO's reviews. Indeed, around half of the 100 countries reviewed had no mention of climate change in their national curriculum, while 95% of surveyed primary and secondary teachers felt that teaching climate change is indeed important, then less than 30% express a readiness to teach it. Yes, only 23% of the teachers can explain well how to take action to tackle climate change. Many of the previous speakers certainly mentioned the need to work on elaborating life skills that change attitude and that are value-based and that are certainly complementary to the academic cognitive knowledge and technical skills that we acquire in the formal education systems. So again, this background, indeed, UNESCO last year launched the Greening Education Partnership. I think some of you know it well, and some of you have already engaged through the partnership. That is a global initiative and that takes a whole of a system approach to address climate change by accelerating the implementation of climate change education. First, let me reiterate that the initiative was very much youth-driven. It was steered up and inspired by the youth movement of the youth movement at the Transforming Education Summit that took place last year. And as a consequence, the partnership really aims and targets, aims to deliver strong, coordinated and comprehensive action to prepare every learner to acquire knowledge, skills, values and attitudes to tackle climate change. Briefly, just to share with you that the partnership does have a four-tiered approach. And the next steps that it aims to achieve together with partners in the next years are across these four pillars. The first pillar is the greening schools. Indeed, through that pillar, the partnership is supporting a whole institution approach for greening schools through greening teaching and learning, through climate-ready school facilities and operations, including governance and community engagement. So this is the first pillar. The second pillar is around the greening curriculum to make sure that there is a relevant quality of learning content and pedagogy on climate change education. The third one is the greening the teacher training and education system capacities to strengthen policy, planning, finance, and implementation. And the fourth one, last but not least, is the pillar on the greening communities to become climate resilient through lifelong learning. So the partnership is an open and inclusive community of member states, of private sector, civil society, academia, various NGOs and institutions committed to achieve the targets of one or several of these 4 components. Again, the 4 components are greening schools, greening curriculum, greening teacher training, and greening communities. The partnership is very much gaining speed with, again, as many of you are already involved. I'll be happy to detail further based on the question and based on possible questions and interaction, but I'll try to stop here because also to respect the time slot given to us. So thank you so much for your attention on the approach and the global greening education partnership by UNESCO. Thank you, and over to you, Radhika and colleagues.
Vivian, I think we will be happy to share all the links from UNESCO on the Greening Education Partnership so that all of us are aware about the partnership. I want to now move over to Rajiv Ranjan from Glow from Home to get the student flavor, because he's been engaging with a lot of students in a very interesting manner, which talks about culture and very much what really mentioned values, culture, and integrated into climate education. So I want to ask him, what do students want to learn? We know from UNESCO, this is the partnership, all of the 4 pillars are very critical, but now let's hear from you on what do students want to learn and how, what are the questions they are asking?
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you, everyone. So Radhika, as you're aware, we at Globe from Home, we have pioneered a new pedagogy to offer global citizenship education. So what we do is we use live streamed virtual world tours to enable learners to travel to different countries around the world, meet and interact with other cultures in real time, and gain a worldview, both literally and metaphorically. And so over the last 3 years, we've had the opportunity to meet and interact with learners across the world from different countries, from different backgrounds, whether from formal education or non-formal education, different ethnicities, completely different and diverse backgrounds. And what we found in our interactions is that what resonates with students, wherever they are in the world, irrespective of their backgrounds, is the people-to-people interactions with others around the world. So, for example, we have a climate education program where we take learners to different countries around the world to see the impact of climate change in real time, and to interact with communities and learn about solutions and sustainability. Now, what we have seen consistently is that when students travel on these world trips virtually, and they meet with communities, what you find them consistently moved and impacted. So they are able to relate to others. So it's coming more from a perspective of empathy than sympathy. So if you look at climate education and how it's been taught historically, we've taught it using facts and figures, and that clearly hasn't got us. We haven't made much headway with that clearly. But using the social and emotional learning, we are finding there is a kind of learning that's very organic, because when you're meeting, say, a community in Bangladesh who has been impacted by ocean level rise, when you're interacting with this community, you find that learners are resonating to human beings in another part of the world, and they're sharing the human problem. If they're meeting, say, an indigenous community in the Amazon who have faced deforestation and they suddenly find themselves in a modern world without the means to adapt to it, they're able to realize their role if they are in the global north. And they're able to see the climate injustice of it. Now, how do you teach climate injustice or global inequity using facts and figures? Whereas we are finding that what resonates really is, say, for example, if we were traveling, those of us who've traveled to other parts of the world and spent time with local communities, our relationship with them changes because we then go beyond the stereotype and we start seeing them as human beings. And that's what the sort of social and emotional learning that we have been able to provide using live virtual sessions, it has been the greatest learning that we've had through the course of the last 3 years.
Thank you, Rajiv. Such a pertinent topic and such a pertinent way of discussing it, because usually teachers and informal educators use facts to talk about injustices, and half of those facts are very difficult to grasp. Particulate matter, what does it mean? Carbon dioxide emission, what does it mean? So I think this is a great way of, seeing how you can get the people's perspective and get value-based education and get live interactions as we go forward. I'll ask Hannah Thachia to explain from UNESCO's perspective on public-private youth partnership forums that she's been spearheading, called the Generation Unlimited. And we really want to know, because this is such a fascinating initiative, Hannah, from UNICEF, to see how can youth be together. And there are many youth online here who are school students. We have youth around the table. So we all want to hear about how can youth be connected with each other to again learn from each other.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Great. Yeah. First of all, I just wanted to say I find the discussion fascinating, and I'm really glad to be part of a discussion. I'm really finding it very interesting how everyone is looking at the same topic, at the same barriers and issues, but from very different angles. And so because it's such a holistic and complex situation, it is important to look at all the different perspectives on how we can get together and solve for this issue. So as you mentioned, Radhika, UNICEF leads a public-private youth partnership platform called Generation Unlimited, which is devised to essentially connect young people to opportunities in the learning to earning space and sustainable development. And we're primarily looking at our work through the lens of climate and the lens of green skills and green job space. I think a lot of us here today, we mentioned that there's a changing landscape of education, and there's demographic trends that are shifting labor market trends and so on. So really a lot of dynamic changes happening in this space. And yet there are quite a lot of incredible opportunities also emerging for young people, particularly in this digital and green sectors. And what I mean by these opportunities, I mean opportunities for skilling, for employment, for entrepreneurship, and for social impact, really. So at GenU, we've been working, Generation Unlimited, we've been working on a range of different solutions in this space. And as I mentioned, being a public-private youth partnership platform, we've kind of been working on this space with partners. To be specific, this year we've worked with over 2,600 partners globally, ranging from civil society organizations and corporates and youth-led organizations, UN agencies, including UNESCO, actually, who's part of our Global Leadership Council, to really have this truly global reach and touch the young people's lives within the space of course, relevant skills and meaningful impact on society, primarily on the climate space. So there's a range of different initiatives that maybe we can speak about over the course of the discussion. But in terms of how can young people, how can different institutions, different partners, organizations help this mission going forward? Essentially, as I said, at the heart, GenU is a partnership-driven platform to empower young people. And so our significant reach really derives from that diversity of the partners we work with. So we work with UN agencies, we work with the private sector. For instance, we've been working with a whole range of private sector entities, including Unilever and PwC, Microsoft, Accenture, to skill young people for the future. We've also been working with youth-led organizations such as the Scout Movement and YMCA to support young people to take climate action in their communities. And maybe very relevant to this discussion, given that Columbia University is hosting for 2 consecutive years, we've also been working with Columbia University and their CEPA program work with young people. And they've really done a tremendous job. These young people that are doing their master's degrees at Columbia, they've been doing a tremendous job in helping us contextualize our programs. This year specifically, in fact, we've been working with them in greening our flagship global entrepreneurship initiative in Kenya, Imagine Ventures. So there's a whole range and host of different opportunities to engage with Genu. As I mentioned, we are at our core a partnership platform, and what that means is we're every single program that we have at the global and local level has always been ideated, co-created, co-delivered with partners, and specifically with young people who are part of our governance structures, are part of our staff, and really work with us on the day-to-day to make sure that we're kind of tackling the complexities that this rapid transformation requires us to tackle. So yeah, I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Looks like a range of initiatives that we can all be a part of. Very selfish plug. Yanis and I are looking at each other, and we would love to work with you, UNICEF, on the greening education, along with our colleagues here who've been working on the summit. So we'll definitely let us continue the discussion. Least but not the least, I think the most important person here is Tim. He is one of our hosts. So I took the liberty of having him last because he's one of us, but I think a very important contributor on our end to learn from what do students at Columbia University want to learn about sustainable futures, what has Columbia University been doing, and I really encourage Tim and other students here, university students, to reflect on this panel and take a few things forward, and ask university members as well to see how global citizenship can be involved. But Tim, over to you for your reflection.
Yeah. So hi, my name is Tim. I'm at the School of International and Public Affairs, SIPA. I am an MPA candidate, and I work in the development practice subsection of the MPA degree. A lot of interesting things, but mostly our focus is on sustainable development and how development practice is in practice, I should say, a sustainable development focused way of implementing policy, implementing new and cool jobs, implementing new and cool education. And one of the main things that I'm interested in is green technology and technology for sustainable development. And that looks very interesting and it looks very cool, but I think education plays a huge role in all of the things, and I kind of want to echo everything that everyone has said on the panel before, where education uplifts a lot of the different things. And one of the things that I'm mostly interested in and that I've seen that has interested me is kind of this juxtaposition between context and between implementation in areas of the world that are perhaps a little less formal or perhaps a little less well-structured, right? So we talk a lot about context in our classes and how context is important and how extremely difficult it can be to implement a policy in one place where it might be very easy to implement it in another place. And I think education has the power to be this kind of leveling the playing field, right? And what that looks like, it varies from place to place. One of my concerns is being a Columbia student, all the things that I learn, all the things that I see, and all the people that I'm exposed to, and the concepts that are brought to my attention are from a very privileged standpoint sometimes. And when I say privileged, I mean myself as well. I mean that the things that I learn are not public knowledge, or they're not publicly advertised or displayed. So I think in the future, I'd look to use the things that I'm learning at Columbia and make them more easily accessible, make them more easily understandable, and figure out a way to kind of translate some of the technical jargon that I've had to go through in my assignments and make it easy for people to meet us where they are. So.
Thank you so much, Tim. So again, going back to Rajiv's point on moving beyond facts and figures and technical jargons and actually working on greening of education, even at higher education institutions. Thank them for getting at that perspective. Now, this is not a Zoom meeting where we all don't get a chance to discuss and engage and have our questions be addressed. So please feel free to type in your questions. I have 2 questions already that have been asked, and I open it up to any panelist who would like to address it. One question is regarding cross-cultural collaborations and ESD. How can we promote cross-cultural education and education for sustainable development in various different forums? And then the other question was, maybe we'll take 2 questions or 3 questions at a time. The other question was climate standards. It was specifically asked for Indonesia, but I want to open it up for other countries, global standards. How do we deal with, I think we are all looking for green standards. What are these standards? How do we develop it? Anything that resonates with that, please feel free to jump in. I think Lily was nodding her head with the standards, so can I ask Lily to maybe jump in quickly and say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Radhika, and fascinating questions and discussion. I'm not gonna be very detailed, but I'm just gonna share that it's a particular conversation. It's part of a particular conversation taking place within the Greening Education Partnership. One of the plan activities are indeed to work and set up an agreement on the Green School Quality Standard. And then the other the part within this global standards is the greening curriculum guidance. So this will be presented, particularly second part, the greening curriculum standard. UNESCO will put forward a proposal forthcoming later in the year to be discussed also among our member states. But just to mention that I don't have I don't have contribution now to guide you particularly what the particular standard on the greening school quality is gonna be, but just to share that is a discussion taking place within one of the working groups of the Greening Partnership initiative. That's from me, and definitely to welcome also the comment of the importance of cross-cultural competencies within the education for sustainable development, global citizenship education. These are tracks that are indeed game changers and are part of what we call transforming education. So there are lots of movements and engagement around this topic. So including relevant research taking place. One, if I may just add to the cross-cultural competencies, one particular institute that has taken the lead within UNESCO system is the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Peace Education that has concrete projects and research dealing with cross-cultural competencies. But this is from me very briefly and only on the surface of the topic. Thank you, over.
Thank you. Anyone else would want to jump in with cross-cultural discussion?
I just want to add, Radhika, to what Lily said. In terms of cross-cultural competence and collaboration, we first need to have awareness of other cultures, which goes beyond, beyond stereotypes and beyond facts, because we always talk about, we knowingly or unknowingly, we box different cultures into different stereotypes. And this kind of a barrier can only be broken if we are actually spending time with other cultures. This is what we've found with our projects, where, say, for example, we've taken learners to a house in China and they've spent Chinese New Year with them, or they've gone to a family in Costa Rica and learned something from them. The sort of interaction that you get where you're able to relate yourself with somebody else, that breaks down those barriers. So, I believe from experience that building that interface, those interactions on a human-to-human level is quite important to have cross-cultural collaboration. I mean, that globalization, as Jeffrey Sachs says, is learning from each other. And I think that's quite important, that we create a forum where we can connect people beyond borders in that sort of sense.
Thanks, Rajiv. Maybe we'll ask Jacqueline, Valerie, and Charlie to ask the question in sequence. Please make it 1 minute, and you've also listed down the questions so we can all see them. And I'll ask my other panelists to respond to your questions. Jacqueline.
Greetings, Dr. Jacqueline Beto here, Chief Strategy Officer of North Science and Sustainability, Inc. It is a pleasure to have been on this informative Zoom. One of the questions I have when it comes to curriculum and interdisciplinary learning is embedded within the curriculum, what call to action is being charged for the student as well as the community they're impacting or connecting with? Because at North Science Sustainability, we believe in generational sustainability. So how are they being charged to go educate elders, younger students, community members, and key stakeholders after the curriculum has already been taught?
Thanks, Jacqueline, and Valerie and Charlie, and then we'll ask the panelists to respond. Valerie?
Yes, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful session, very, very stimulating. I am a member of the architecture lobby. We are working on resilience and the built environment in education. So one of the questions that comes to mind for me is how youth is engaged around addressing their own security with regards to housing as it relates to the climate crisis. During the COVID pandemic, housing became like a major remedy. And as we face more and more crisis, you know, in New York City where I am, we had this orange sky that also required staying home. So there's an increasing importance to having access to housing. There's also a big need to adopt certain systems in the home. We can think about gas stoves. In the US, it's been talked about a lot, and you know, also addressing housing located in danger zones. So when there's a risk of flooding, or just like setting up plans around these issues. Housing is also related to food chains, you know, when homes are in food deserts. So I think it's very much like entangled with all of these larger questions, but also very close to the experience of youth. So I was wondering to which extent you engage these students with or youth with these questions. And then the other question is really about how we can engage youth on the big questions of reporting standards. So carbon, of course, is an important question. There's this also increasing conversation on biodiversity, and if we consider ESG, also, you know, social considerations, gender ratio, etc. And, you know, so the question of standards in coordination with then the infrastructures and the nature of these infrastructures. So of course, like someone brought up, engaging digital aspects and those since there's that global ambition, that's a question that seems very important to me, and I was curious to hear from you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Charlie?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, greetings from Singapore, and it's so nice to see some familiar faces. I'm Charlie. I'm a recent college graduate from Duke, and I co-direct Solving for Humanity, which is a global competition for young people to give feedback to the United Nations Development Program. It's one of those programs that really tries to make young people thought partners whose values and priorities are factored into global goals like the SDGs, rather than just us being called upon as volunteers or implementers, right? So I really resonated with the conversation we've had so far about the importance of having values-based education or going beyond formal education to think about what kinds of values are we instilling in the next generation of global citizens, which I think is, you know, an area that's really important to focus on explicitly. But I'm also really cognizant, having just finished college, of not overemphasizing the difference between formal education and more holistic approaches, because formal education has its own set of implicit values. For example, something I found in a lot of my classes was an emphasis on technologically driven solutions to issues like climate impacts or economic inequality, rather than really diving into the political economy of these issues. And so my question is really around how do we ensure that we surface and we engage critically with the values that are embedded in formal education, particularly in the global north.
Thank you to all the questions. Over to the panelists for any reflections. really there's been a lot of discussion on value-based, so I think you have to comment on.
Yeah, I have to. Yeah, but thanks a lot. And there are so many thoughts at the same time in my mind at the moment, and where to start. But I think that it really comes back on that how we how we want to build the future, and exactly living that in the peaceful way already now. And then what I'm thinking exactly, I'm just reflecting a little bit on when my children were young and they were in the school. The school was built in that way that the school is not inside in the school building, but they were really talking a lot in the community. So really thinking that exactly it's not only that you can write and read and count, but you are really living in the community. So you're going to the nature, you are really taking care of the elderly, you're helping the others, and it's some kind of the whole school, the whole community teach at the same time and learns this as well. So it's not only in that way that exactly the kids are just learning, but they can really teach a lot the adults as well. And I think that's a little bit attitude thing, what I mentioned in the beginning. And somehow I think that it's if we are not really respecting the values why we exist, then we can kill each other immediately. And that unfortunately happens everywhere in the world at the moment. So in that way, I think that the values are so fundamentally important, and the learning of the values needs to start from the age 0. So it's really starting from the beginning. But exactly the community where we are living need to respect those values and really live those values in practice. Not only that it's rhetoric, what you are reading from the textbooks and then repeating all of that, but you need to understand it and live it based to the values. And I think that's really is the cornerstone for all of that. And if we are not really facilitating and really keeping the values, whatever we do, and unfortunately, I'm taking the example from the politics. I'm using now very, very current situation in a Finnish case. I'm coming from Finland, and we have the new government at the moment. It's almost going to collapse because there's a crisis at the moment. One of our Minister for Finance, she is really racist at the moment. And thanks for the citizens, thanks for the media, there's a lot of witnesses at the moment in publicly. And now there's really the crisis with the whole government at the moment. And exactly the government who's supposed to promote the values, respect the human rights, good governance, rule of law, all of this. And now exactly, thanks for the active citizens, now that's everywhere in the head titles at the moment, that there's a lot of discussions going on. And I think that this is really one of the good examples of how the society feels that now exactly the government is against on the values. And we don't respect all of that, and we want to exactly have the change. And I think that these kind of examples we need to showcase as well, that the values really matter, how you behave, and how you, especially if you are in that kind of high-level position where you have the power, how you are using your power. Is it by yourself, or is it for the community or the society?
And it's amazing to hear on the value of power and how it can also topple governments. And I also want to commend one thing, that at least the public is able to raise voices. In many countries, the public doesn't even have the liberty to raise a voice. So that's again another level of complications that we are facing in. And what is the work of global citizenship education as we go forward is something that is critical here. Wendy, Tim, Hannah, any comments on some questions that are here as well? Wendy and then Tim. Yes, Wendy.
Happy to chip in. I just wanted to kind of catch, some of the enthusiasm that Tim conveyed. I mean, he was talking about this agenda as being new and cool and, that sense of optimism. And I think that's really important to call out that we're working and talking about the most fundamental contribution here that education can make. So this sense of transitioning from here to there, and there being a much more inclusive, a world where no one's left behind. I want to kind of flag a warning, which is, the sense of standards and guidelines and so on. Okay, laudable, but let's not pretend that we have worked it all out and that we're somehow not in a deep learning exercise. And so I think when we talk about, the idea of of maybe guidelines or support or sharing our learning, like we're doing here, sharing case studies. We just produced a book around this space, around sustainability in higher education. We didn't set out a mandate. What we set out was a suite of learning experiences that we reflected on critically. And so, others then can look at that and contextualize what might work in their particular context, I think is important, and their particular place. And so I think those two things have come up very strongly for me, that we can't somehow take a solution, so-called, in one place and simply do it to others in another place. This has to be a sense that we are in an adaptive learning experiment in this space. So I just wanted to call that out. I think the other thing that that was spoken about in one of those questions was about housing and flooding and so on. And I think, as well as thinking about broader solution finding, this sense of adaptation, many of the things that we forecast would happen are happening. They're here now. So this sense of adaptation, this sense of being able to mitigate, to build resilience with communities, I think is a critical charge for many of our students. And this is where we take some of those esoteric comments around it's 1.5 plus this plus that, something that we just can't get our hands around, our hearts around, even if we can get our heads around. And what we're doing here, I think, is calling for this agenda to be made personal, to be made local, to think about how our universities and colleges, and I think that broader generational workforce, which we might come on to in a moment, how we can really get our hands around that and empower people to participate. And I think that's the key thing that's coming across for me, is not that we add in something to an already crowded curriculum for young people, but how do we create this sense of a kind of connected university, a connected learning ecosystem with all the other conveners that come in. But just a warning that let's not pretend we've got all the answers, that we're in a state of readiness to somehow give a guide to how you do it where you are, because we're kind of not yet. We're still in this learning space. And then the final comment really is just to call out, the essential role of higher education as a critical evaluator of what's going on. I think holding to account, commenting on gaps, raising the issues that are not being spoken about, thinking about those things, and is a really important part of our role, as well as being a participant, also being a critical observer through the research and scholarship that we do. So I think that's kind of danced across a number of those questions, but hopefully that's, moves us on.
Thank you, Wendy. My colleagues here online are suggesting that I'm doing a very bad job of managing the time. So I have to quickly move on to the next round and have first maybe, sorry to all the questions that are coming in. Please write your questions and we will definitely incorporate them in some form or the other as we go forward. I want to head over to Tim to just get his reflections on anything previously, as well as my question on what should students learn about sustainable development to better prepare them for the future, and what do young people want to learn and how?
I might be able to do that question and the one that I wanted to respond to as well. I wanted to talk about Jacqueline's question about how to educate the relevant stakeholders and what the call to action is post-curriculum. And I'll start with the education for relevant stakeholders. And I don't necessarily have an answer for that, but I more have an anecdote of something that I learned when we were in class last semester or 2 semesters ago, when we talked about what they call SIDS, which are small island developing states, specifically in the Pacific area, Pacific Sea, Pacific Ocean, and the Caribbean, and how these are small nations that feel the brunt of the effects of climate change and the brunt of the effects of changing weather patterns, while not being able to affect, by virtue of their size, not being able to affect meaningful or large scale change in that context, right? So when you talk about educating relevant stakeholders, it's great to go to smaller nations or nations where infrastructure is maybe not as well organized, and go there and do development projects, but really the onus is on the larger nations, and as Charlie mentioned, the global north, right, who have larger resources, larger scale countries, and just a larger kind of range of a scope of abilities. So that's what I think about when I talk about educating relevant stakeholders. And post curriculum, I think the call is similar, right? Is when you teach people about sustainable development and about these goals, it's a global responsibility that is unequally distributed. And I think that's something that really needs to be emphasized when you talk about post-curriculum work, and while you're in the curriculum as well, right? You're learning about things that are going to be disseminated throughout the world, but certain places need them more than others, certain places need them less than others, and you have to be able to kind of tweak your ideas and implementations based on the necessity of the context that you're in.
Thank you, Tim. That was perfectly said. Moving on to Hannah from UNICEF, maybe you can give us a flavor of the individuals, NGOs, private sector, higher education institutions, different NGOs that are involved in UNICEF's Generation Unlimited work, and what do you think should be our collective vision forward?
Yeah, thank you so much, Radhika. Maybe I can just quickly also recap a couple of impressions that I wanted to highlight earlier. I just wanted to also echo Wendy's point on not having the answers yet. I think this is a very, very crucial and important point. It is a new topic that a lot of us are grappling with. No one has the answers, but it's certainly very important to have these sorts of avenues and platforms for knowledge sharing, and also for building on each other's learnings and evidence. It is a new field, and we will only be able to accelerate on this field if we really build on each other's learning. So really appreciated that point, Wendy. And speaking of that point, I think the importance of partnerships really needs to be highlighted when we're talking about such a complex issue. I think when we're talking about skilling and about educating young people, we really need to recognize that working with the private sector, on top of course, our usual partners within the government and the education sector, working with the youth organizations to build the skills that young people need for the future lives and livelihoods and jobs of the future is really, really crucial. I think there's really a parallel type of work that needs to happen both at the formal and informal level when we're talking about skilling young people. Generally, a lot of young people are learning informally on climate, on jobs of the future, on green jobs, and so on. And so we really want to make sure, at least from the Generation Unlimited standpoint, that we take a dual approach through partnerships and making sure that we're working at the institutional level in reforming education, while at the same time working with the private sector to offer certifications, micro-credentials, working with private sector to keep up on the skills needed for the future of jobs. So wanted to highlight that. And then finally, putting youth at the center of action. Us as a public-private youth partnership platform, we do see this as a really, really crucial point. We see it from young people that we work with on the day-to-day, that climate is a demand-driven issue. Young people are interested in it. They do find it relevant, they find it cool, they find it necessary, and they really want to work on it. I was recently in the Maldives to support youth-led organizations to work with other young people on climate mitigation measures. And you do see that appetite, especially from islands that are so affected by this issue. You do see it in young people, the eagerness to really work on this topic. So yeah, partnership with young people at the center of it are definitely crucial. So when we're looking at what are some of the organizations and some of the initiatives we're working with in a partnership format, maybe one that's super relevant here is last COP27, we launched the Green Jobs for Youth Pact together with ILO, the International Labour Organization, and UNEP. and a coalition of young people and private sector entities. And the aim of this initiative was to accelerate the creation of green jobs and build green skills in high impact climate vulnerable sectors. So the pact is working to support the creation of 1 million new green jobs while also working with the private sector to green another 1 million existing jobs and really provide support to green entrepreneurs and green the operation of at least another 50,000 businesses by 2030. It is an initiative that we're working with LinkedIn. We're working with a range of private sector entities that are relevant to the job sector as well. So just to paint a picture of some of the types of work we're doing in this partnership when it comes to green jobs and green skills. We're also working on a flagship initiative this year, Green Rising, on supporting 10 million young people to take action on climate resilience by 2025. So we're working with young volunteers and young advocates while also really helping to power this net zero transition through green ventures. So really indeed looking beyond the green jobs and creating a more holistic and just transition. And here we have the likes of SAP and Accenture and the Scouts and heads of states really leading the way for us as a partnership platform that focuses on green jobs and green skills. I'll stop here for now. I'm conscious of time, but yeah, I'm happy to share more links on the side here on the chat to share more about some of these partnership initiatives we've been working on.
Great, thank you, Anna. Moving over to Lily, and maybe can I suggest like rapid fire round, because I also want to have the audience again do like maybe 5 minutes of Q&A. Lily?
Yes, thank you, Radhika. I wanted just very briefly to tackle a few points that were touched upon during the discussion, and I might have to go afterwards. But definitely, in terms of the inclusion of in the curriculum design, focus on intergenerational dialogue. This is part of the new global vision and understanding how the education system would be set. One very important emphasis is that the vision has been extended to include the right to lifelong learning, and it goes through empowerment of youth, but it goes through intergenerational dialogue. These are elements that are taken into account in the curriculum design, into the advice provided to educators and teachers. So I think this is the global understanding, and the overall recommendations and moves are going into that direction. The other one, very briefly, on the fascinating discussions about values, cultural diversities, human rights. You know, this discussion has been going on for quite some time, but I have to say that I think it's definitely taking a conclusive end. And while we can understand some concerns raised, including through the questions here around what are exactly the values that would be promoted and taught at schools and through the educators, there is an overall understanding that has transpired into global agreements on the human rights standards that we now have in place. And for the educational community, we know there has been a very significant work going on with the peace education, the human rights education track, now with the global citizenship education track, and it's constantly being reviewed, revised. All the stakeholders in the process are being sensitized, and certainly there is a sense of what universal human values are. Some of them, you know, peace, human dignity, they're uncontestable, and they cannot be taken as some of the cultural diversity elements that are often being taken out, not often, but are being taken out to justify breach and violation of specific human rights. I just wanted to also touch upon that part of the conversation that really also mentioned, and I really thank you all. I'll have to leave you. I have something I have to attend, but it was a very useful and engaged conversation. Thank you, and over.
Rajiv and Wendy, maybe one minute each, but I want to definitely ask the question. Rajiv, first to you. What is your, UNESCO is focusing on transforming education. What is your definition of transformation? What is it that means to you when we talk of transforming education? And to Wendy, we discussed US higher education, but I want to specifically ask community colleges, what are their roles and in global citizenship education and education for education for sustainable development.
Thank you, Radhika. So to me, transformative education, and conventionally, we've always taught education has been restricted to the four walls of the classroom, and which leaves much of learning about other countries and cultures as a secondary subject. We've always taught global citizenship as a secondary, almost as a secondary subject, whereas solving humanities problems requires first building a global community. And so transformative education to me personally would be one that first of all has a focus primarily on other countries and cultures and creates inclusivity in that sort of sense. And secondly, as we are discussing today, if we have to have a collective commitment to the planet, we need to build a global community of learners. And if we are to have a just transition, then we need to bring all the learners who are not in education into mainstream education. And so, Hannah mentioned earlier, and I echo what Wendy said, that, the good news is that when we are talking about a green future, it does not necessarily require college degrees or a formal education. Now, it's also an opportunity to create a green future where we can provide skills which are not degree based, but which are skill based. So, for example, if you can educate, if you can take a cohort of learners from Ecuador or Dominica or any of these countries and provide them the skills not just to adapt to a future which is increasingly looking difficult, but also to adapt and gain that parity with learners from around the world. So transformative skills require transformative education. To me, is a more holistic education that also has green life skills and has a knowledge of the whole.
Thank you, Rajiv.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. And I echo that, but I'd also just tailor my comments also to Jacqueline's question from earlier, because when we're talking about the role of community colleges and technical and vocational education, this is the first time in our history that we've had 5 generations in the workforce. This is the first time in our history that we've got more people aged 65 and over than those 5 and under. So, that tells us that, we've got a population crisis, but we've got an education crisis. We need to make sure that our colleges and technical vocational education is creating opportunities for everyone, not only to kind of catch up with the kind of skills of now, but creating those kind of seamless pathways that can lead them towards kind of terminal degrees or others, or just badges of learning, competencies. We can be very creative, I think, in that space. But thinking about the fact that education, yes, it happens in formal education settings, but I think, as you said, Rajiv, it also happens throughout life and everywhere else. So can we find ways to measure and weigh some of that and give that academic credit? Can we recognize stepping on and stepping off points throughout your life? I think we'll look back in a few years and the idea that you finish education at the age of 21 or something is going to look ridiculous. We need to be continually upskilling, and I think connecting our community colleges and their pathways into higher education, connecting in-work learning and in-place learning and community learning. So we're talking about a kind of learning ecosystem of lots of different players, but working in a sense that is focused on enabling people to realize their potential. And I think that really goes into that idea of leaving no one behind. And so I see a critical role for different kinds of institutions, but coming together in that kind of broader agenda. And just to pull out, again, just reflecting back on that Transformative Education Summit that we held in February, some of the things that were being prioritized as a focus for that education was around how we collaborate, and that's really come up today, that sense of global citizenship, that sense of social and emotional learning, that sense of equity. So all of those things have come up as almost new asks in some ways, but maybe reprioritizing some of the ways in which we deliver the education throughout that sense of a through lifelong education pathway. So I thank Jacqueline for that question, and also hand it back to you, Radhika.
Thank you, Wendy. A lot of interesting points to go forward. But now, unfortunately, our time is limited, but we will not stop this discussion. We will have a continued engagement in September and others. But before we do that, I'll be a little biased here because I want to give Vidya Bindal a chance to speak. She's my neighbor, and she's sitting amongst all the soccer camps and the Bharatnatyam dance discussions, and Bharatnatyam dance sessions that she's continuing. So I want to just give her a chance to discuss a few things. She's been picking my brain on gender and climate education. But maybe Vidya, if you can just ask from your many questions, can you maybe ask like one question so that we can have our panelists respond?
Yes. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for this discussion today. I am a sophomore in high school, so I think this is really enlightening to see how interested everyone is in greening the education for everyone. But more specifically, when the conversation of like green jobs came up in the beginning, that definitely did pique my interest. But it's kind of like a simple question, but what exactly would like constitute as like a green job, and like does that definition change between like different places in the world based on what they have, what they don't have, and also kind of just like the idea of green jobs, when we were also talking about education in communities and like with the four-pronged attack, I think that Lily was talking about, does that also have to do with how to try to motivate people to take part in this green jobs? Or is there like another method for trying to get them to participate in green jobs? Because for themselves, would it benefit them?
Over to the panelists, any reflection, maybe Helen?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you, Vidya, for your question. Very important one. Essentially, what is a green job? We generally go by the ILO definition, which is International Labor Organization's definition. And what we define as a green job is actually a decent job that contributes to the preservation or restoration of the environment. And that could be in the traditional sectors, such as manufacturing or construction, or in the new emerging green sectors, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and so on. So when we're looking at green jobs, we're looking at jobs that can help improve energy and raw material efficiency, limit greenhouse gas emissions, minimize waste and pollution, and so on. Whereas at the enterprise level, which is also something we look at continuously, is green jobs that can produce goods or provide services that benefit the environment. So for example, green buildings or clean transportation and so on. So that's sort of the definition that we generally go by. Your second piece of the question was how businesses and people would be motivated to take part in green jobs. I mean, it depends on who you ask, and it depends on the stakeholder. Businesses, this needs to be profitable. It needs to be something that customers want. A lot of we see today a lot of major corporates, a lot of major businesses are shifting and trying to focus more on green. It is primarily because it is something that is really demand driven by young people, and young people are a huge portion of their customer base. And so again, it depends on who you ask. I think for businesses, that's definitely one. For people, it depends on where they are. If they're in Maldives, if they're in Bangladesh, if they're in areas where they're really being subject to major climate effects, then for them, it is a matter of survival. It is a matter of creating a future that is sustainable for them and for their offsprings. And so it's a different answer depending on who you ask, but generally speaking, there is a clear direction on all stakeholders moving towards green jobs.
Thank you so much, Hannah.
Can I just offer just a very, very brief comment to your excellent question, and that is to say that all jobs will be green jobs. At the moment, we're talking about people, planet, inclusive prosperity. Every job will need to think about the issues reflecting on sustainable development. I think the other thing I would call out is in making this just transition as we come out of certain industry sectors, we have to make sure that we don't leave those individuals simply behind. We need to make sure that we build the skills escalator, the pathways into helping them transition. It might be from older industries to new electrical vehicle industries. It's technical education that needs to move away from some of the things as we move from some industry sectors and we develop, these broader industry sectors that are much more balanced around people, planet, prosperity. So I think eventually, we'll be talking about all jobs and whether you're a nurse, whether you're a medic, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a technical, whatever it happens to be, you will need to be thinking about how you balance these different calls and trade-offs. So I think
I want to just quickly add on to what Wendy was saying very rightly about every job being a green job, because if you look at green skills as we define them right now, today we talk about solar, we talk about very specific industries, but climate awareness and education is a fundamental green skill that we all need to have to transition into a green economy. Every single one of us, whether we are architects or accountants or coming from informal education, we need to have that fundamental knowledge if we are to work cohesively towards a transition. So increasingly corporations will want youngsters who have that knowledge, and therefore, as Wendy said, every job is a green job, and it opens up therefore a lot of opportunity in the future for that one fundamental skill.
Thank you, Rajiv. Any last reflections, Tim and Lily? Thank you. So, having said that, I think these are really important reflections. I just want to have one more person who has really been shaping a lot of SDSN's work here. Dr. Helen Bond from Harvard University is here. She's the chair for the SDSN USA network. Maybe one or two lines from her as a closing remark. Before that, I just want to mention that this is not a one-off event. We will continue to engage with the panelists in terms of a white paper, maybe a paper that will help to inform the global policy dialogue on global citizenship education and green jobs, and also will be focusing on a lot of discussions going forward for COP28 that's about to happen in November, December. We will be hosting another event as a follow-up of this with critical ideas to take it forward at the SDG, at the sidelines of the UN SDG Summit as UNGA. So please hang on. If there are ideas, please feel free to email, write it up in the chat comment. I know we've not done justice to all of your comments, but with the interest of time, we just wanted to have all of our discussions, at least the key points being highlighted. So thank you so much. Over to Helen, maybe for a few closing remarks before we end the session.
I'd like to say thank you for being invited to this wonderful session. It's wonderful to see the ideas that we discussed in the Transformative Education Conference being carried over. I'd like to invite you all to the 2023 National Education Summit put on by the Smithsonian Science Education Institution. You'll hear about some research that I've been doing along with the Smithsonian in a Howard University Middle School of math and science around environmental justice. And a focus on gender and role models. It's a very interesting study. We looked at, what inspires young people of color in urban neighborhoods to care about these issues and how they communicate these issues. So surprising findings. I did drop the link in the chat, but I'd like to thank Radhika and her team and the organizers of this wonderful program. And it's been a pleasure to be here. And thank you to all for your efforts.
Thank you, Dr. Bond. Dr. Bond has a really amazing story map on books being banned in the US. I think that should be a mandatory reading for everyone. to see how global citizenship education is curtailed by many governments and many states, depending on which political party you're on. But let me stop here before that is another panel on its own, and we'll hopefully get into that some other day. Thank you for joining, and I hope this has been a useful discussion. We will continue the discussions in various forums, and hope to get all of your comments and suggestions so that we can formulate our white paper based on the reflections so far. And I want to thank the panelists for sparing their really busy time to share all these wonderful thoughts, and a lot of things are in my mind currently. Hopefully, we can all assimilate all of that information and see how we can take this important dialogue forward. Thank you so much.